Okay, Baruchim Abayim. So we are continuing Hilchot Pesach, and this is our second shiur, and we are beginning Taf Lamed Bet 432. So what have we seen in the previous three Simanim? In 429, we talked about learning about Pesach 30 days before. We talked about whether that applies to other festivals. We discussed the concept in the Gemara of, which the Rambam is posek, of learning the halachot of each chag on the chag itself, and that applies to all the chagim, everyone agrees. And also the Minhag, the Rama brings of ma'ot hitim, of financial support people with their matzot. We talked about the things which we don't do during the month of Nisan, specifically fasting and also eulogies and stone settings and visits to the cemetery. In 430, Taf Lamed, we discussed Shabbat Gadol, why it's called that, and the various customs with regards to Shabbat Gadol. And then in 431, we began to discuss Bedikat Hametz. We explained the fundamental principle of Bedikat Hametz, which is it's a rabbinic mitzvah, because from the Torah, it's sufficient for a person to nullify their ownership of the Hametz, even if the Hametz remains in their home. From the Torah, that's sufficient. But the Hachamim, for two reasons, and it's important to remember these reasons because there'll be nafkaminot, there'll be ramifications of them throughout the course of learning Bedikat Hametz. One reason was because the Hachamim were concerned that you won't genuinely nullify. The second reason is because even if you genuinely nullify, you may be tempted during the course of Pesach to partake from the Hametz, and so therefore they said you have to actually search and you have to expel it from your house. We talked about doing it at the beginning of the evening, and thus we said that it takes precedence over Arvit, despite the fact that Arvit is more frequent. Nonetheless, Bedikat Hametz comes before, so unless you're praying before nightfall, as we Sfaradim generally do, then once the nightfall comes, and we want to do Bedikat Hametz and then do Arvit later, unless he's concerned he's going to be too tired to do Arvit after, then he should do Arvit before. We discussed how to do Bedikat Hametz. We said we do it with a candle in order to check through in the nooks and crannies of the house. We said it's fine for a person to have electricity on a home, but it's important to use a candle, or for that matter, a torch, to be able to actually access all the points of the house. And finally, we discussed at the end of Taf Lamed Aleph the various restrictions and things a person is not allowed to do once the time for Bedikat Hametz comes, and even for some things half an hour before. Eating and drinking, having a full-on meal are all things which a person should refrain from doing once the time of Bedikat Hametz, well, even half an hour before the time of nightfall. One should then engage in a full meal, one can have snacks, but once the actual time comes, and one shouldn't sit down to dinner, even if it's a small thing, until they have done Bedikat Hametz. Okay, so those were the main points which we discussed in the last shiur, and now we move to Siman Taf Lamed Bet. We began it last week, so we'll do the beginning part slightly quicker. I'm sending once again the link where we are learning Shulchan Aruch, Hilchot Pesach, Siman Taf Lamed Bet. Let's see, Maran. Din Birkat Bedikat Hametz u Bet Seifim. Now we talk about the blessing of Bedikat Hametz. Says Maran. קודם שיתחיל לבדוק יברך אשר כי תשאל מצווה ציוונו על ביעור חמץ. Before a person does Bedikah, because of course always all the brachot which we recite are always meant to be over la'asiyatan, or meant to be in advance of the action of the mitzvah we are performing. So before we recite the blessing, al bi'ur hametz, on bi'ur of hametz. Now bi'ur means to. We will see later on what bi'ur means. Bi'ur can mean to burn, bi'ur can mean to rid, to destroy. We Sfaradim hold that bi'ur means to destroy Hametz, whereas the Ashkenazim hold in the first. It's actually mahloket in the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda and Hachamim. Hachamim, we'll see this when we come to the getting rid of the Hametz. Hachamim said that bi'ur leva'er means to destroy. You can break it into pieces and throw it into the sea. You can burn it. You can do whatever you want, but just to destroy it. As Rabbi Yehuda understood, bi'ur means to burn. Now, the main halacha, everyone agrees, is like the Hachamim, that it's sufficient just to destroy and get rid and expel the Hametz. The Ashkenazim were mahmir, and they said actually try to burn it. But Mikar Adin, everyone agrees, if you can't burn it, then it's sufficient to do destruction of the Hametz. And the truth is, we do that. This year, we're going to have to rely on that. This year, when Shabbat falls Erev Pesach, you can't burn the Hametz. You can burn on Friday morning, but you're going to have Hametz on Friday afternoon, Friday night, Shabbat morning. That Hametz, you can't burn it. So you're going to have to rely on the main opinion of the Hachamim, which is just to destroy. But in any case, the Bracha which we recite is on the destruction of the Hametz. And we discussed last week, why are we saying a Bracha on the destruction of the Hametz, which only happens the next morning? And we said because the whole purpose of the Bedikah is for, although we're doing it before the Bedikah, but the purpose of Bedikah is for the Bi'ur. And therefore, we can say the Bracha al Bi'ur Hametz, even though the Bi'ur is going to only happen the next day. Why did the Hachamim not establish a Bracha al Bedikat Hametz? The answer is because the whole purpose of the Bedikat Hametz was for the destruction the next day. And therefore, they didn't want to say a Bracha, they wanted to establish a Bracha on something which is only a preliminary, only a hechsher, if you like, only a preparation for the real thing. Now, it's important to recognize it that Bedikat Hametz is in and of itself a mitzvah midrabbanan, it's a mitzvah of the Hachamim. So it would still have been justified for them to say Baracha Bedikat Hametz because it's a preparation for it's a mitzvah, it's a preparation for bi'ur, but it's also a mitzvah in its own right. Nonetheless, they felt not to take away from the main thing of the bi'ur hametz, thus they did not establish the beracha of bedikat hametz. Also, we don't say al bitul hametz. Bitul means to nullify because nullification happens in a person's mind. It's a conscious decision a person makes, and you don't say beracha on something in a person's mind. And therefore, the Hachamim felt the best beracha would be before the bedikah to say al biur hametz, which works for both the bedikah, which you're doing that evening, and for the destruction the next morning. And therefore, the next morning we don't say another beracha. It's the beracha which we say al biur. In fact, the poskim write that when we say al biur hametz on the night of 14th Pesach of Nisan, we have in mind for the bedikah we're going to do now, and also for the destruction the next morning. This beracha is a continuing beracha in a sense for the mitzvah of the bedikah and the destruction the following morning. Okay. Now we say al bi'ur hametz on the destruction of the hametz. It all comes back to the same point, not leva'er hametz. And here it's important we say al bi'ur hametz. Although with many berachot you should know there is actually a debate whether it's al or le. So, for example, is it likbo'a mezuzah or al kevi'at mezuzah? There's a mahloket rishonim about that. The Rambam says it depends if you're doing it yourself, if someone else is doing it, whoever. But here it's important al and not le, because le means to do it, you're about to do it now. Now we're not destroying till the next morning. So this is why here we're particular to say al bi'ur on the destruction. The destruction it's going to happen tomorrow, but we're beginning the process of the destruction by searching for it tonight. So this is why it's crucial we say al bi'ur hametz. Poskim do rule that if you said leva er hametz b'di'avad, you can be yotzeh, but certainly one should be particular to say al bi'ur hametz. Fine. Continues the Rema. If you did begin searching on the 14th without saying a beracha, you can still say a beracha any time throughout once you haven't completed, like any mitzvah which has a continuation of the mitzvah, lulav, tefillin. Even if you didn't say the beracha before, but as long as you're engaged in the mitzvah, i.e. you're still wrapping up or you're still shaking the lulav, you can still say it's still all part of the beracha. So to here, although you should say it before, if you didn't and you began searching, you can still say the beracha until you have completed the searching. If you didn't say any beracha the entire night, so you did bedikat hametz, but you didn't say a beracha, the poskim hold, and this is the final psak, that you do say a beracha the next day in the morning when you come to destroy it. So I did bedikat hametz during the night. I never said any blessing. The next morning when I come to destroy before the bi'ur hametz, I would then say al bi'ur hametz. Continues Shulchan Aruch. One should be careful not to speak from when a person has completed the blessing until he begins searching, because that would be a hefsek. If you did speak in between, you answered the phone call in between, then you'd have to repeat the beracha, and that would be a beracha labatala, blessing in vain. If you said the beracha and you asked where should I begin searching, or where is the candle, or where is this, it's all part of the bedikah. That wouldn't be hefsek, and that would be fine. But anything which is not germane to the actual bedikah, that would be hefsek, and that would be forbidden. What about once I've begun searching? So I've said the Beracha, I've done one room, can I speak in between? Meikaradin, you can't speak. Even something which is not ready. Meikaradin, you can't take a phone call because the Beracha has been hal on something. But says Maran nonetheless, וטוב שלא ידבר בדברים אחרים עד שיגמור כל הבדיקה כדי שישים אל ליבו ויבדוק בכל המקומות שלא ישים בו חמץ. Nonetheless, it's the correct practice for a person not to speak unnecessary matters throughout the entire search, the entire evening, so that a person is able to focus on the Bedikah. Of course, anything relevant to the Bedikah, a person should speak outright and expressly. Do we need to check this cupboard? Have we checked this cupboard recently? Is there hametz here? And so on and so forth. All of that, of course, a person should speak normally and naturally. But anything which is irrelevant to the Bedikah, a person is better to refrain from doing so. Of course, there's extenuating circumstances. A person needs to take an urgent phone call, so on and so forth. Yes, mikaradin a person can, but it's certainly better practice not to. Okay, good. So now halacha bet. Says Maran, בברכה אחת יכול לבדוק כמה בתים. If you own a number of properties, common example was you owned your house and you owned a shop. So I can say one blessing, begin my house, and then go to the second house and continue. Even though it's far away and I have to get in the car to get there, you could argue that normally we say if you have to travel somewhere, the walking, the traveling is considered hefsek. So perhaps you could argue that you should have to recite a new beracha on the second house. No, since the mitzvah of bedikat hametz is to check anywhere in your possession. So the beracha is, I'm doing the beracha to check anywhere in my possession. So whatever that is, still, you don't say a beracha because that's the mitzvah, to check everywhere in my possession. If it means I have to travel in between, it doesn't matter. The mitzvah is to check everywhere, and this is part of it whichever home I'm going to. And so if we have different places, a person should say the beracha. We're going to learn tonight, because Hashem, you have to check a bet knesset and a bet midrash. Normally, it's the rabbi or someone or one of the gabbaim who go around and check the synagogue. So when they finish they say the beracha. Same thing. You say the beracha, you have in mind, and you continue. You do your home, and then you go and do the bet knesset as well. Yes, ma'am.
And if you spoke mundane matters, would you have to redo the bracha?
No, you wouldn't, as long as you began. Why would this be different than what we learned?
Let's take an extreme example. So you do it in London, you have a place in Israel, you fly there, and then you do it there. But in the meantime, you've talked all sorts of mundane matters.
So that was never discussed, because to be able to have to travel so far, to get somewhere so far, the principle, I would say, is still the same. That this is still the mitzvah bedikat hametz, it's checking everywhere. And so even if you did speak in between, it's still fine. You could, in such a case, in such a scenario, what you could do is you could have in mind that the beracha which you're saying is for this home. You only want to have this in mind, this home. And then when you get to the next place, you would say another beracha.
So that would be a hasad dat. You forget all about it by the time you go to fly and everything.
Firstly, we're talking about I'm trying to think about how this scenario could play out, because you're doing Bedikah Chametz at the beginning of the night, and to get enough time to do till the next morning. I don't think it's going to be possible, by the way. Just practically, I don't know how that's going to be possible. How would you be able to do Bedikah Chametz in London and fly, and then still the night of, the night of thing? So practically, it's quite difficult. But I think then would be the best that you would just have in mind. The poskim right have in mind that you want the beracha only to be hal on this place and not for the next place. When you get to the next place, you would then recite a second beracha. But they only advise this if there's a big distance in between. So you're traveling for some time in between to get from one house to the next. If it's down the road, down the corner in the same neighborhood, then one should really say one beracha and have in mind all the properties which they are searching. Okay. ואם בעל הבית רוצה, יעמיד מבני ביתו אצלו בשעה שהוא מברך. continues מרן. אם הבית רוצה, יעמיד מבני ביתו אצלו בשעה שהוא מברך. What you can do is, you can bring your family together, say the beracha, one person behalf for everyone, ויתפזרו לבדוק איש איש במקומו על סמך ברכה שברך בעל הבית. And then if you have a number of properties, so the בעל הבית can say the beracha. And then each of the kids, there's 3 properties, the kids go and they hear the beracha, and then they will say with that, and then they go and search. One goes, does this house own, does that, and the next one does the other house. And they're all simultaneously doing Bedikat Hametz with one beracha because it's one house. It's one Ba'al Habayit, it's one owner. Of course, if the houses belong to the kids and the kids should say their own beracha in their own home, why gather together in the first house and do it? We're talking about one Ba'al Habayit owns a number of homes, so then he can say the beracha on behalf of everyone. He can say the beracha, and that's fine. That's for himself. But they're also acting on his behalf. They're going to be his shluchim. They're going to be his emissaries because it's his own property. So they're his agents. So they can search on his behalf as an agent, but they need to hear the beracha. And this is why they should gather together, hear the beracha, and then go and do Bedikat Hametz. In the first instance, one should not make an agent do Bedikat Hametz unless they're going to say the beracha. So this is why they should gather together and hear it. The problem is like this. Let's say, I'll give you a scenario. Let's say I began enthusiastically at the beginning of the evening. I thought I'm going to do this house and the other house. I'm going to have time and I'm going to have enough energy to do so. And I said the beracha by myself. I began searching. A couple of hours in, I'm tired. Something's come up. I don't have the energy anymore. So I send my son to go and continue the Bedikat Hametz in the other house. Now there's a problem here. The problem is you yourself can't say the beracha again. You've said the beracha. Your son can't say the beracha because it's not his to say the beracha unless you make him an agent. But you make him an agent, but you already began. You say the beracha yourself. So this is why it's not recommended to do that unless there's no other choice. Then he would do it without saying a beracha. That would be fine, because at the end of the day, it's still one big mitzvah, and he's continuing the second part of it. In the first instance, if you're going to split up, and by the way, this can happen in one big house. If you've got a big house, gather all the family together. Yeah, I don't know what people's customs are with Bedikat Hametz, because it's something done in your home. It's never done publicly. But we always did it all together. The whole family would walk together, and it would sometimes be quite tight. And but a much easier way is just that the Ba'al Habayit says the beracha, and the kids split up, and you can designate each. Obviously, we'll talk about who can do Bedikat Hametz in a moment, but each person can do one room properly and dedicate half an hour to each room, and like that, split up the house, and it's much better like that, really, in a sense. Okay.
Is the bracha is also hal on the women to do? Can they do the bracha in search or only on the men?
Well, that's the thing. So let me ask you a question. Can a woman or a child do Bedikat Hametz? So the poskim do say that Mikara din, a woman and child can. Generally speaking, we don't rely on children. So what's clear is, this is accepted by all, is that Shulchan Aruch is posek this, that a child is not ne'eman for tevilat kelim, for example. You can't send a child under bar or bat mitzvah to go and immerse utensils in the mikveh and ask them when they came back, your 11-year-old, did you do it? It doesn't work. It's a deoraita. Since it's a deoraita, therefore you have to be with them, or someone who's obligated, a man or a woman can do that. If you send your child under bar mitzvah to go and be tovel a glass cup, that would be fine, because tevilah kelim of glass is only rabbinically mandated, not from the Torah, and so for that a child would be believed, and he would be accepted. If the child came back and said, "Yeah, I did it," that's fine. But for Doraita things, that wouldn't work. Since Bedikat Hametz is a rabbinic mitzvah, the poskim do say that Mikar Hadin, a woman and a child can do it. A woman, of course, and a child, of course, can as well, because it's a rabbinic thing, as long as obviously they can understand what they are doing, and they are reliable, clearly. They do say it's better if it's over bar mitzvah. Okay, but meikar hadin, it can be done. And so, coming to your question, a woman certainly can say that. So that's the thing. A woman, if she owns her home, let's say she's a divorcee or a widow and she's living in, of course she can say the beracha. She's got an obligation. Clearly she can. But a woman who has a husband, then why should she say the beracha? Because he's the Baal Habayit. At least, conceptually, that's how it used to be. The man was the Baal Habayit, and so he would say the beracha. That would be the correct way of doing it. Of course, if a woman is living alone, then most certainly she has to say beracha and she has to do it herself. Good. Now, we come to an interesting Rama. Says the Rama, let's analyze these two lines. The end of 432. It's become customary to leave pieces of hametz in places around the house where the person searching will find them, so that it won't be a blessing in vain. Firstly, pay attention. You place the pieces of hametz in a place where the searcher will find them. It's not about trying to put it in places around the house where he can't find them and he has to dig up everywhere to do. There's no such concept. The concept was where it began the minhag. This minhag came, it's first recorded somewhere around the early 1200s, that you would leave pieces of hametz around the house, and then he would stumble upon them, the searcher, and like that, it won't be a blessing in vain in the event that the searcher never found any hametz, which seems to imply that the mitzvah is to find hametz, not to search hametz. But then continues the Rama, Umihu im lo natan lo ikev. If you never did this minhag, it's absolutely fine. The da'at kol adam im beracha levar im nitzah, because that's not what the beracha means. The beracha means to search and to destroy if you find, but not that you have to find. So this is two lines of what he's saying here, the way to understand the Rama is saying that meikar hadin is, this logic doesn't stand. Meikar hadin, the beracha is not to find hametz. The beracha is to search for hametz, and even if you didn't find anything, it's absolutely fine, because you don't have to find anything, you have to search. But nonetheless, it became customary for whatever reason, because there was an opinion which believed that you have to find, and therefore it became customary to leave pieces of hametz around the house. You should know a number of points of this. Firstly, is the Rishonim who brought this at the beginning when this minhag was recorded mocked this minhag. The Ra'avad wrote this minhag is minhag nashim, who it's a minhag of the uneducated and ignorant. The Hacham Tzavi said this is ridiculous. People who do this, there's no point in it. So, although it's a nice thing to do, the poskim generally didn't find much importance or significance to this. You could say that it's this is our own reasoning, which is a nice idea, is that it motivates the person searching to look properly around the house. That was never the reason given. That's a nice reason given nowadays, which especially makes sense nowadays when we've already searched the house the last month. So actually, very often people are just going around the house on the night of Erev Pesach and doing don't know what. They sometimes feel they're wasting their time. So this gives them a bit of motivation to be able to look properly. It's a nice idea, but it's not required. So meikarin is unnecessary. Nonetheless, it is the minhag. People do it. Sfaradim at least definitely did it, and it was bolstered by the Arizal. The Arizal said 10 pieces. There's no concept of 10 pieces in halacha. 10 pieces is completely from the Kabbalah, but you need to put 10 pieces around the house. It was originally just pieces of hametz around the house. The Arizal came along and he bolstered this minhag and he said you should do 10 pieces, and this is why nowadays, generally speaking, the Sfaradim have the custom to do 10 pieces of hametz around the house. However, what should be made very, very clear is that one should not be leaving the 10 pieces, big pieces around the house, big pieces meaning more than a kazait. Should not be leaving slices of bread around the house. In the event that they get lost, if it's less than a kazait, then that's fine. let's say the kids, as many families do, the kids hide it and the parents, the father and mother look for it. And sometimes it's happened, the kids say, where did I put the 10th one? I can't remember where it's around the house. Right? So I always tell the kids they have to write it down, and I'm not going to play the game with them unless they've got a sheet for every single room where it is in the room. So that's the way we do it. But fine. But they didn't write it down and they got lost in 9 pieces. You're going crazy now. There's a piece of hametz around the house. The answer is, if it's less than a kazait, fine, we're going to learn. And less than a kazait, you don't have to search for. Less than a kazait, you can just do bitul. You can just nullify it. And so you come to the end, you search as much as you can. You couldn't find it. Do bitul hametz, and that's fine. Whereas if it's more than a kazait around the house, although midoraita, bitul would work, it would nullify it, but nonetheless, we can't really rely on that in the first instance. You have to search, you have to look, and you have to find it and get rid of it, because there is a kazait of hametz around the house, and that may reappear and show up during Pesach, and that'll be a major problem. And so this is why, if you are going to do this minhag, which is a very old minhag, and the Sfaradim did it, do it, but make sure that you know exactly where they are, and B, more importantly, is that they are small, minute pieces of hametz, really small pieces of hametz, so it's not even close to a kazait. Now's not the time to go into this. We have discussed this in the past, how really the evolution of the concept of what a kazait is. The kazait nowadays, we accept it to be 27 grams. It's likely to be much less than that. So this is why I repeat, it's important to be very small, so that it's not a questionable kazait when it comes to things which do doraita. Okay, so that brings us to the end of Siman Taf Lamed Bet. We've talked about the blessing, we've talked about speaking, we've talked about checking number of homes and splitting up between the family, and finally the minhag, which we've just discussed, with regards to leaving pieces of hametz. Are we happy with Taf Lamed Bet? Let's now move to Taf Lamed Gimel. Taf Lamed Gimel, Din Bedikat Hametz Ubo Yud Aleph Seifim, further laws of Bedikat Hametz and 11 Seifim. Now, most of the Siman are exact scenarios straight out from the Gemara and Pesachim. But we're going to go through all of them because there are some principles and some are really interesting although they're not relevant nowadays, but some really interesting ideas in them. The main thing which we need to remember, the overarching principle of this entire chapter, is that you only need to check in places where it's possible during the year hametz came in. If you're certain that hametz never came into these places, you don't need to check. That's the overarching principle. We'll see many manifestations of this, but also some interesting points. So let's have a look together. Siman Taf Lamed Gimel Dinei Bedikat Hametz. Sif Aleph. You have to check with a candle, not with moonlight. So you can't rely on the moon. You have to actually use a candle. And we explained last week the reason the Hachamim said to do it at night is because then people are at home, and also the candle will help you to be able to look into the nooks and crannies of the house. Full stop. Now, Mishnah Berurah says, if you searched the house the night before, or for that matter, any time before, and you were careful and certain that you didn't bring hametz into that place after you searched it, and tzarich lahzor v'livdok, Mishnah Berurah writes this right at the beginning. First Sif Katan Mishnah Berurah. You do not need to recheck that place. This is a really important point which I talk about every year when I talk about Hilchot Pesach. People don't realize this. Bedikat hametz nowadays is really focusing on the kitchen, or focusing on places in the house where you have been using to eat until the 14th. If there's normally hametz upstairs, and you searched all upstairs the past month, you cleaned. Cleaning doesn't mean searching, by the way. Cleaning means whilst you're cleaning, you're looking in the holes around the cupboards, where on the floor and around the beds. If you bring hametz into the bedroom, and so on, you did that all, and then you said, okay, you put up a sign on the room, no hametz in the house. You do not need to check that at all on the night of Erev Pesach. That's done. You only need to check in places where you've been eating. So let's say you cleaned the entire, as many people do nowadays, they've cleaned the entire house and searched for chametz, well in advance, and all they've got left is chametz around in the kitchen. Mikar hadin, you only need to do bedikat chametz in the kitchen. That's it. The one exception to this is what? Who can remember? What's the one exception to this?
If there are young children,
The
because
children.
If there are
there are
children
like
in the house,
cats.
children who you can't rely and haven't been under your watch the entire time, which is generally speaking, we don't have our kids under our watch all the time. So they haven't been under our watch the entire time, then you cannot rely on the previous Bedikot, and you'll have to search again on the night of Pesach anywhere where that child could have reached. So but if you're a couple living together without kids, and you haven't had the grandkids over the last few weeks, and there's no kids being around, and you've searched the entire house, Bedikat Hametz won't take you long. It'll take you just to find, to wherever it is in the kitchen. It doesn't have to take long. That's an important principle. Anything you've searched before Pesach properly, searched, not just cleaned. You've searched, you've checked with Hametz, and it doesn't. You haven't had people accessing it afterwards. Does not need to be researched. Okay, continues Maran. If for whatever reason you were unable to do Bedikat Hametz in the night, came back very late from work, it wasn't possible to do it, then you still have to do Bedikah Hametz the next day. People don't realize this. If you didn't do Bedikah Hametz at night, you have to do it the next morning. And in fact, you're meant to do it straight after Shaharit before eating. You shouldn't have breakfast until you've done Bedikah Hametz. You shouldn't be doing anything else. You should do as early as possible, straight after you've prayed. You do Bedikah Hametz. But you shouldn't just rely on the light in the house. You should also, again, use a candle, again, to be able to access every part of the house. If you have a large, let's say, sukkah roof, or like a large porch, for example, in Bedakah or Hamad Dayo, then you can rely on just using the sunlight. If you've got a sukkah roof, a skylight, where you've got plenty light shining in, then you can rely on it. Now, obviously, he's talking about because they just relied on the sun. The sun doesn't always get into all the parts of the room, therefore use a candle. If it's a completely open room with windows all across, then really you could just rely on that during the day. You don't actually need to use a candle. Yes, Robert?
Can one make a bracha if one has found themselves in that situation? Doing it in the morning straight after Shaharit.
Of course you'd say bracha, yeah.
For some reason I had a recollection where if the bracha can only said in the evening, and if you've missed it, you do it without bracha. But I don't know why I had that recollection. So happy to be corrected. So maybe I can see no logical reason why you wouldn't make a bracha because you're still searching. So.
Let me check that. I thought as far as I remember, you do, but you've made me doubt myself. Let me check. I'm almost sure that you do. Okay.
No problem.
Okay. Next. סעיף ב' אין בודקין לאור האבוקה אלא אור הנר. We'll do some of these halachot quickly. אין בודקין אור האבוקה אלא אור הנר. You cannot search using a big fire or a big flame. Only one candle. Why? Because if you're using a big flame, you're not going to use it properly to check, because you're going to be scared that it's going to burn your home. You're not going to use it. You don't be able to access it. And so therefore you can't use it. It's too big to enter into the nooks and crannies, and so they said you can't use that. You have to actually use one candle. This, by the way, means to finish off, not fatty things, because again they're going to spill and you're not going to use them to go into the corners. Rather just use a simple wax candle. وهو دين يحيد وهو يحيدي in one single wax candle אבל שני ריאות ביחד אפילו כלידם כאבוקה. A Havdalah candle cannot be used for Bedikat Hametz. I'm talking about Havdalah candle, I mean the ones which they, with 2 wicks on them. That's considered an avukah. That's considered too big a flame. Simple wax candle should be the one used, because otherwise you're concerned it's going to spill if it's fatty, or it's gonna make a fire, and so on and so forth. I've always wondered about this, because the reality is nowadays, with all the kinds of houses which we live in, it sometimes makes, when we're walking around with our little wax candle, and you're trying to get underneath, you get worried. There's carpet and there's sofas and there's wood around. The Chachamim restricted very many different kinds of candles because people wouldn't check properly because they're scared it'll burn. There's a strong argument to say. I haven't seen anyone say this. This is my own personal argument. So nowadays, better just to use a torch, because nowadays we don't really look at properly with places under a sofa. You're not going to use your candle to go under the sofa with, or the kids have been, because it's extremely flammable, and if you put the flame underneath, it's going to burn it. So you have to use your common sense with this a bit, whether to use a candle or maybe use a candle together with a torch. So we keep the concept of what the Hachamim established of the candle, but perhaps something additional when you're looking underneath things. The reality is that's what I do when I'm looking underneath. I can't take the candle underneath. I take my phone and use it as a torch and look underneath, so if it sees everything, there's no hametz there. Okay, Sif Gimel. Bodek kol hamekomot sheyesh lahos shema yichnisu bahem hametz. You check any place where it's possible the hametz was brought in there during the year. If you're certain the hametz was never brought there during the year, it does not need to be searched. If it's a doubt, you need to search. Meaning, if it's places where sometimes you brought something out, if it's a place where you used for hametz, of course you have to. If it's a place where occasionally, not regularly, was brought, you have to check, even if it's not regularly. If it's a place where you're certain you have the policy, you don't bring hametz into this place, as we're going to see many examples of this, it does not need to be searched. And therefore, I repeat, if you have a policy at home, there's no food goes upstairs, and you don't have kids at home, upstairs does not need to be searched at all. ולכן, הר"ן, כל חדרי הבית והעליות צריכים בדיקה. You have to check all around the house, all the rooms, שפעמים אדם נכנס בהם ופתאום בידו, because sometimes people walks into different rooms in his house and he walks upstairs with חמץ. אבל אוצרות יין שמסתפק מהם וכן מצבן וכיוצא בו אינם צריכים בדיקה. But if you have storehouses or sheds where you never bring hametz there, you wouldn't go there during a meal, then you do not need to search it. If it's a place where you would go in during a meal, you would bring your bread in and walk in with it whilst you're getting a new bottle of wine, then you would need to check that. If it's a place where you would never bring hametz into there, a shed, for example, you'd never really bring hametz into there, that does not need bedikah. It makes our life much simpler when we think about that. Places in the house where you would never bring chametz into, you wouldn't need to. Which is why, again, a toilet or a bathroom, no one I know eats there unless you've got children. Kids can take bread anywhere. But if you don't have that, then you do not need to check a toilet or a bathroom, because no one in their right mind is going to bring food into there and eat it. Siv Daled. Horei habayit v'zizin haboltim me'ktalim. So, protruding beams, which are not too high and not too low, tzrichim bedikah. It's talking about protruding beams. Apparently, someone would leave hametz there. But the point, this is an important point here, is that if it's something which is very high, it doesn't need bedikah. So, you do not need to check cupboards in your bedroom, even if you have food upstairs. You bring food upstairs. But you don't need to check the top parts of the cupboard, because when would food ever go there? Unless you used it sometimes to store food in it, fine, then you'd have to search it. But why would you assume that there'll be hametz? Then it wouldn't be possible, and so you wouldn't need to check that for hametz in places where they're very high, and you don't. Again, the concern is that during a meal I may bring food up there, but that's maybe I went into another room, I went into the bedroom. If sometimes you do that, you don't have a strict policy. but you're not going to go up into a carpet and do that. Therefore, that doesn't need to be searched if it's very high, or if it's very low as well. It doesn't need bedikah if it's very low. אבל הגבוהים שאין יד האדם מגעת שם, it's very high where it can't be reached, והנמוכים פחות משלושה טפחים, אינם צריכים בדיחה. Or if it's very low, these beams, then you wouldn't leave hametz there either, and therefore doesn't need to be checked. Again, the Mishnah Berurah points out in a number of places here as well, he points out that if the kids are around, then it has to be checked, the low bits, because there they could put it into the beams, they could leave the hametz there. We're not given definition of a tinok, by the way, and you have to use your common sense what that is. A child who, if you have 11-year-old, youngest child, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, and they can be trusted, they can be relied upon. If they're told not to, and they say they didn't, then it can be. Obviously, it's not about bar bat mitzvah here. It's about where you can expect and have a reasonable discussion with them and ask them and rely on them not to. Hey. Gag hayatzia v'migdal shegagehem meshupa'im, the slanted roof of an attic or a tower, mipnei kach en gagehem roim mishum tashmish, and therefore you can't really use this area of space, enam tzichim bedikah afilim b'toch habayit, even in the house. This is a classical example of a loft. A loft where really when you go up there, you can't really, all you'd use it for is storage. You would never spend an extended amount of time there. You wouldn't have a drink there. You wouldn't have food there because it's very tight. And so you would only go there to get something and come down again. And so these places do not need to be checked at all. Of course, if it's a flat loft where you can put your head up and walk around, then that would need Bedikah Hametz unless you had a policy never to bring Hametz into there. Mishnah Berurah points out. Then of course you would. But if it's slanted and it's hard to walk around in there, you don't need to check such a place. Again, the same principle. Next, Vav, Refet shel bakar eno tzarich bedikah. The cattle shed. Don't need to check. Shema yashem hametz habemot yechru, because even if you gave hametz to the animals would have eaten it. This is all these examples are from the Gemara. The chicken cage doesn't need to be checked in place because the chickens would eat it. Also all around the courtyard, as opposed to if there are places in the side where you could store things. It doesn't need to be checked. The birds and the ravens would eat it. This is why we do not need to search a garden. However, if you definitely left hametz there, then you do need to search it, which would mean seemingly I would need to search the garden. If I had throughout the year lunches with bread there, you would need to search it. However, Poskim explain, this is mahloket actually, but we're posek lahakel with this, that this is only if it's been used only from when the time of Bedikah came, hametz was put there. So and this is common by the way, if you are eating outside, and some homes already like a few days before Pesach, you can't eat in the house anymore. You have to eat everything outside in the garden. So people have eaten the night of Bedikat Hametz outside in the garden. So then there's been Vadai Hametz there that has to be checked. You have to search there as well. It's part of the Bedikat Hametz. You have to search there as well. But if you ate there during the year, then you can assume that the ravens and the birds have eaten it. That's Mishnah Berurah. He brings a mahloket about it, but we're posek la'akel. So as long as and the night, if on the night of Bedikat Hametz you use the garden, ate their Hametz, then you need to search that area of the garden where you used it for Hametz on the night, or at the very least during the day if you can't, see outside. The Ramas points out that he points out an apparent contradiction. The way to understand this is that if you through the chametz, if you used chametz in a public domain, then you definitely don't need to search that, even if you definitely used chametz, even on the night of Bedikat chametz. So if I ate and I left chametz because it's a public place and there are other birds, then you can actually leave the chametz there. You don't have to worry about it because it's all before the zman of Isur chametz came about. Okay, good. Now we come to some more cases in the Gemara, but some interesting and quite peculiar things and some hashkafic things here as well. Let's see, Shulchan Aruch Sif Zayin. Hor sheben Yehudi lehavero, kol echad bedek ad makom sheyado magat ve'ashar mevatel belibo v'dayo. So you got two people living next to each other, and there's a hole in between which connects the two properties. Again, don't think it's a terraced house, if you like, nowadays, or those days they had two rooms next to each other, and there's a hole which goes in between. It's a long hole in between. So you check as far as your hand can go inside the hole. Your neighbor checks as far as he can go. There's a space in between which you couldn't reach. That's fine. You do bitur hametz in your mind. You go as far as you can. Use the candle. You look inside. That's fine. If you have a Jew and a non-Jew living next to each other, you don't need to do any bedikah in the hall. Why not? Do your half at least. He doesn't have to do his half. He's a non-Jew, but why do you do your half? Why? Says the Gemara, there's a danger here. What's the danger? The guy is going to think to himself, what on earth is this Jew doing? Late at night, he's got this candle, putting the candle through the hole. He's trying to do some kind of spell on me. And therefore, he's going to come and he's going to hurt the Jewish person and kill him because he's concerned that he's putting a spell on him. That's what the Gemara says. Now, the Gemara asks a question. The Gemara says, okay, that's true. That might happen. But don't we have a principle? Shluchai mitzvah inani zokin. When you're doing a mitzvah, no harm comes about. So what's there to worry about? You're in the middle of doing a mitzvah. Answers the Gemara, Shani deshchiach hezeka. When potential danger is common, then we don't rely on the principle of shluchei mitzvah and anizukin that you do mitzvah. You can say when something is far-fetched danger, fine, engaged in the mitzvah, it's fine. But something where it's common, apparently, that's what the Gemara is saying, this danger was a common one, that the goyim, I think what the Gemara means is the persecution of Jews by non-Jews was common, not that this specific scenario that I'm going to put my hand in, they're going to think. The idea that Jews were persecuted non-Jews was common. And non-Jews in those days needed the tiniest excuse to erupt a new affair, a new scandal. And so that's why the Gemara says, Hezeka Shani, it's Shchech Hezeka, it's different. And therefore, Hachamim say, don't do anything. Don't put your candle down there. Don't put your hand down there. Don't worry, just rely on bitul on your heart. So again, the same principle we've seen. The Meikara din, you can rely on bitul, you don't need to do bedikah. And when there was a danger involved, Hachamim said, do not do it. They do write the poskim that if you definitely did have hametz there, you know for sure there's hametz there, then you should check during the day. And the next morning, go and take out the hametz and get rid of it, if you know there's hametz there. But you don't have to really do bedikah. Okay, the point of this is, what's the point of this nowadays practicality? First, there's a nice idea here of the Shluchei Mitzvah and the difference. But the point here is, don't do Bedikat Hametz in a way, if in a way which will arouse people's suspicions and think we're doing something dangerous or something. It can also be in terms of doing Bedikat Hametz in a way which is dangerous for health and safety reasons, so on and so forth. Going around, everyone in a public place, in your office, going around with your candle. These kinds of things you have to use. This is what we're seeing here. Be sensitive to non-Jewish people around us, and don't give them excuses to be able to hate us and to do bad to us. Okay, another interesting halacha, Sif Chet. Kotel shenishtamesh bo hametz bahorim. a wall, you stored chametz. There was a wall outside, you stored chametz, or inside, you stored chametz in the holes of the wall. V'nafal, v'na'asa gal. Okay? Now fallen, it's become a heap of stones. Now, there was chametz there. I stored chametz in the holes of the wall. Now the entire wall has collapsed, and now you've got a heap of stones. Now I know for sure in there, that heap, there is a kazait of chametz there. I remember storing there in the holes chametz. אפילו אינה גבוה 3 טפחים כדי חפיסת הכלב, אין צריך לבדוק תחתיו. If it is high 3 tefachim, don't worry about it. Because what's going to happen? It's there, but you do bitul. We're not going to make you go under the heap and do it. But even if the heap is less than 3 tefachim high, so less than 24 centimeters. So a dog can smell, says the Gemara, high up to 3 tefachim. So the dog, what might happen is he's going to play around, snoop around the heap, go, take out the chametz, and then you've got an issue. You've got live chametz in your house on Pesach, that becomes quite complicated. So you may have argued if it's less than 3 tefachim, so the dog can come in and move it around and bring it out into your house, then you would have to search that. No, even then you don't have to search. Why not? Because dangerous creatures hang out in these heaps. חשינן שמא אחר שישלים בדיקתו שאינו עוסק במצווה יחפש אחר מחט שנאבד לו ויעבור לידי סכנה, full stop. Scorpions and dangerous creatures are not a common occurrence in the heap. And therefore the Gemara says, why are we worried about the scorpions? Just go and search. Answer is true. True. If you went and you searched just for your hametz and nothing else in mind, you should go and don't worry about the scorpions. You're engaged in a mitzvah, and since it's less than 3 tefachim high, the heap, there's a concern the dog will come and take out the hametz and move it around during Pesach. And therefore, even though there's this danger, potential danger, but it's unlikely, you're engaged in a mitzvah, go for it. But the Hacham said, don't do that. Because the reality is, we humans, when we're searching for chametz, we're also searching for other things. How many times during Bedikah chametz, whether it's the month before Pesach, when we're searching, or when we're doing Bedikah the night before Pesach, you're cleaning the house, and you find things which are missing the entire year. So whilst you're searching in your heap, you're thinking to yourself, this heap, I'm looking for the chametz, but actually, I'm going to rummage around a bit, see the needle I lost, see this I lost also a battery, I lost this, I lost that. So whilst you're searching around in the heap, you're searching for the hametz, but you're also searching for your personal things. So then it's not shluchai mitzvah. Hachamim were concerned that while you're searching for the hametz, you're searching for your personal things as well. And because you're searching your personal things, says the Gemara, you're no longer protected. Again, 2 principles we learned tonight. If it's a common danger, and common danger was that non-Jews would hurt Jews and persecute them, don't worry. You can't rely, then you can't do it. Sorry, you don't have to do Bedikah. And you can't rely on you're doing a mitzvah. Scorpions in a heap and creatures in a heap are not a common occurrence. And therefore we should, in principle, be saying that I'm doing a mitzvah, it should be fine. The problem is that whilst I'm searching, I'm going to also be looking for my personal things. I'm not fully engaged in the mitzvah just for the mitzvah. And so therefore I can't rely on the principle I'm doing a mitzvah, I don't have to worry about harm or danger. And therefore Hachamim said, don't check even if it's less than 3 tefachim, and the dog may come and take it out. Interesting also, another point to point out that the Gemara says is that the concern is, I should have clarified this. This is actually important Gemara, this. We touched on this in our Tuesday night shiurim a couple of weeks ago. The Gemara says that our concern that you're going to be searching for your own personal things is only when you're searching for them after you finished your search for chametz. I should clarify this. I made a mistake earlier. I said whilst you're searching for the chametz, you're also searching for your own personal belongings. That's fine, the Gemara says. Then you would still have the principle of shluchei mitzvah and nizukin. Why? And this is the famous Gemara here in Pesachim. The Gemara brings this. Ha'omer sela zul tzedakah b'shvil sheyihyeh beni harizet tzaddik gamur. You can give charity for something else, and that's still a good thing you're doing. Meaning, even though whilst I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm also getting personal benefit from it, still fine. Now, how do we square that with what Rambam says in Hilchot Teshuvah, that you do a mitzvah only because Hashem commanded? We discussed that at the time. Different. Okay. It's not that we don't go into that now. But the point here is this: the Gemara says the concern is that after you finished your search for the Hametz, then whilst you're anyway there inside, I've looked around, I can't see any Hametz here, but actually there's some small things there, perhaps some personal belongings. Then that's the concern. And then you may get hurt by the scorpion. And therefore Hakim said, don't do any checking. But if whilst you were checking for the Hametz, whilst you were checking, you were also for your own personal benefit, you would still be protected. Because there is an element, that's the Gemara says, that gives the comparison of you give charity and you also have in mind your personal benefits. So I'm doing a mitzvah of Bedikah Hametz, but also got my personal benefit. That's fine. Problem is, after I finish, so the mitzvah is completely gone, and now I'm searching for myself. That's what Hachamim were concerned. Never said don't do it at all. Okay? Interesting. Vani mili bistam, continues Maran. It's only when you're uncertain. אבל בידוע שיש תחתיו חמץ, אם אין עליו גבוה שרצים, צריך לצום שומר או חצינה, בעניין שאין אצלו סכנה, ויש עליו גבוה שרצים, ובתום בלי הודיה. If you're 100% certain there is hametz there, you can see the hametz there, you know you left the hametz there, then if it's higher than 3 tefachim the heap, don't worry, just do bitul. You don't have to worry about the dog because it's higher than 3 tefachim, just do bitul. If it's less than 3 tefachim, then actually you do have to search with a spade and get in there and take everything out, and just make sure that you don't do any of your own personal checks, because then that's dangerous. Okay. Next halacha, quickly, let's finish off the chapter. Next halacha, very quickly. You have a wine cellar, and the wine cellar you pile up barrels and bottles of wine. You go, barrel after barrel, row after row, all the way up. How much do you have to check? Now, this is, of course, talking about a wine cellar where people go in with food. Of course, if you have a policy, I don't bring food into the wine cellar, of course you don't have to. But if during the meal, sometimes you go in, you're eating your food, and you come in, take a bottle of wine, take a barrel, pour some wine out, then of course you'd have to check it. But how much do you have to check? דהיינו שורה על פני רוחב המרתף, ולא כל שטח המרתף, אלא העליונה רואה את הקורה ואת הפתח והחד למטה ממנה. You have to search the top and the next one underneath it, 2 top layers, but not the entire width of the wine cellar, but actually what it presents you when you come into it. Meaning you've got a huge room, or doesn't have a huge room, a room with the barrels of wine stacked on top of each other, and high in the height and the width. So I have to search the top 2, because that's where it could potentially be, and that's where it's possible for me to reach over Pesach, and also only what's in front of me when I come in, because that's the concern that perhaps during I came in with my food and I dropped the hametz there. But I have to start going into the corner on the 3rd row. That I don't have to do again. This is straight out from the Gemara, what the Gemara says. Although, okay, fine. There is a Minhag Rishonim how to understand it, but fine. Okay, good. Sif Yud. Batei Kenesiot or Batei Midashot, important halacha, tzrichim bedikah. You have to check synagogues and study halls. Now, why? You're not allowed to eat in these places. Don't we have a principle that you never have to check hametz for places where people don't eat? And a bet knesset, it's a sort to eat in a bet knesset. Okay, bet midrash, there are circumstances where you're allowed to eat. So, okay, I can understand why I have to check a bet midrash. A bet knesset, it's forbidden to eat in a synagogue. In a place which is reserved solely for prayer, as the old cathedral synagogues in the United Kingdom, for example, are forbidden to eat in them any kind of food. So what are you checking there for? Says the Shulchan Aruch, only because of the kids. Adults will never bring chametz into there. The kids do. Reality is, we give our sweets to the kids, so on and so forth. That's why we have to check the Bet Knesset. But otherwise, you wouldn't have to check, because why would you bring food into the Bet Knesset? But you have to check it for the children who are going around with hametz. Now, the Mishnah Berurah does point out that
And
people don't always do this, and it's important. The rabbi and the gabbai has a responsibility to ensure that it's checked, and you say a beracha on this. You do say a beracha on the bedikat hametz in the synagogue. Okay, and finally, says the Shulchan Aruch, המכבד חדרו בי"ג בניסן ומכוון לבדוק החמץ אצל ובערו ונזהר שלא יכניס שם עוד חמץ, אף על פי כן צריך לבדוק בליל י"ד. So there's a difference between cleaning and doing bedikah. So if I'm cleaning my house, even if it's on the night before the 13th, and even if I have in mind I'm cleaning for Pesach, but you're not doing a searching, this is a really important point. That doesn't work, and you have to do all over again on the night of the 14th. So when cleaning your house before Pesach, don't just say I'm cleaning. Don't just have in mind I'm cleaning, making everything organized again, because that's not going to work for Bedikat Hametz. You're going to have to do the whole house, all those rooms again. You're cleaning and also searching in the nooks and crannies. So that's important. We recognize that when we search for Pesach, then we're not doing just a sweeping or a cleaning. We're actually doing a search. Otherwise, you'd have to redo it all over again. Says the Rema, it's a good thing to organize where you're going to be searching, so the searching is easier. It's in advance, instead of coming on Bedikat Chametz night and having to search everywhere and it's all a mess. Clean, sweep up a bit, so then it's easier to search. Your pockets you need to check as well. Sometimes, if you sometimes leave hametz, it's clearly if you never put food in your pocket. And for adults, some adults will never do something like that. It's not very gentlemanish. You don't leave your food in your pockets. Not something you do. So then you don't need to. But if it's something, definitely the pockets of children, and if you sometimes carry food in your pockets, then you need to check them, which is sufficient just to really shake it out. We hold you can just shake it out, and that would suffice to do bedikat. Just shake out the pockets. But one should be conscious of this, that one places of one's garment, places of one's clothes where he leaves hametz in them, one should check them for Pesach. Good, excellent. So that brings us to the end of the chapter. One principle, but was some nice, interesting manifestations of the principle. What we've seen tonight is in Taf Lamed Beit, the blessing. We've discussed about different homes and the minhag of leaving out pieces. And in 433 Taf Lamed Gimel, we talked about how to use the candle. What happens if you check before you Daled, what kind of candle we use, and then the overarching principle, which is you only need to check in places where sometimes hametz was brought in, or it's possibility hametz was brought in. If it's clear hametz never brought in, you don't need to. And we saw some examples of that, and the importance of searching, not just cleaning and organizing. It's not a spring clean, that doesn't work. It's a search. That's Bedikat hametz. Lovely. B'ezrat Hashem, we will resume next week, same time, 6 o'clock on Thursday, Taf Lamed Daled, which talks about what happens after you do Bedikat hametz in terms of the nullifications, and then what happens if you didn't check on the night. You need to check on the day of Pesach. You need to check. We'll talk about it as Hashem next week. Okay, lovely everyone. Hazak Baruch. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye everyone. Yes, Mary, go ahead. Sorry?
But do we have in the garden?
So we said that